Thanks for your time here today. It's an honor to speak to you. I, sup- I want to propose to you that you may not do what you think you do. Now, this is based on my decades experience in telecommunications, but I think many of the things we'll talk about here today apply to your industry as well. My goal here would be to have you look at your career in a different way and also have you look at your customers slightly differently as well. So let's get philosophical for a moment. I started off by saying you may not do what you think you do. So, do you really know what you do? Well, this has been a particular journey for me, and I'm going to share with you some of the learnings along the way that helped clarify that question for me. And maybe you can apply them in your own industry, in your own life. In telecommunications, the answer can be quite cryptic if you ask somebody what they do for a living. All the time I worked at TELUS, when people would ask me, "What's your role there? What do you do?" Usually they kind of glaze over and have that sorry I asked look on their face because I would use these kind of terms like, I run network surveillance. At one time, I was the vice president of network fulfillment. Another time, I was the vice president of network assurance. I had teams that did tier 1, 2, and 3 support, etc. I think you get the point. It was really not easy to explain to people what I did for a living. And usually, like I said, by the time I was done trying to do so, they were kind of sorry they asked. Even my own family didn't really know. So I submit, we don't do what we think we do. Now, the next step in my journey was a birthday party. My 14-year-old daughter had a sleepover birthday party of a bunch of teenage girls. It was just a fabulous time. Lots of noise, games, food. But as the evening wore on and the girls got a little more lower energy, they sat around in the family room and they went around the room and they started talking about, what do your parents do for a living? And when they came to my daughter, I was listening from a distance. She said an answer something like this: "I don't know. Frankly, he travels a lot. It's a bunch of technology stuff I don't understand. And frankly, it seems like a big secret." And they went on to other people around the room. The next morning, I'm up early, doing the big daddy breakfast, really enjoying this whole thing. And a couple of the girls approached me and they said, "Mr. Pajak, it's time for you to come clean." And I looked at them and said, "What?" And they said, "You work for the CIA, right? You're a spy because your job's a bit technology, you travel, and it's a big secret." And we all had a good laugh. But I will tell you that many years later, Carla ran into one of those two girls, and the first thing she said to her was, "Has your dad come clean yet?" So the next step in my journey to understand this better was what I call an epiphany from someone who gets it. Now, this story is personal. The reason I showed that picture is because that's an airplane I owned at the time. This story took place in 2007, and the story involves exactly the same make and model airplane as mine. As vice president of network operations, I had network operations centers in Canada that looked after the technology while all the rest of us sleep, making sure it's all okay. One night in September of 2007, a plane just like mine was doing a night training mission south of Calgary, middle of nowhere. Something went horribly wrong and the plane crashed. Unfortunately, the instructor was killed. The pilot was severely injured. Now, the pilot pulled out his TELUS phone and called 911. Now, when that happens, that call gets eventually forwarded to my network operations team. That night, a guy named Dave was on, and emergency medical services asked for his help in locating a cell phone for a downed plane. So Dave, really smart technical guy, the first thing he did was he determined what tower it's connected to. Then he determined which sector, which means which direction from that tower the cell phone was. Then using signal strength and his expertise, he determined where he thought the distance was from that tower. So he was able to tell emergency medical services that phone is north of this tower, approximately 11 kilometers. Now, when we do that, we never hear back again. And that's just part of what we do. We get those calls all the time, try to help us find someone. So normally we don't know the rest of the story. But in this case, we do. Because in December of that year, the CEO of TELUS received a letter, which soon made its way to me. And that letter said, you know, it's a very different Christmas in our family this year because of TELUS than what it could have been. And it told the story of this, what I just told you, from the perspective of the son of the student pilot. And of course, he got this emergency call to go to the hospital. His dad was severely injured. And in the letter, he wrote the list of injuries. And frankly, it's a miracle that man survived. And then he said, lying on the gurney next to his dad was a bloodied cell phone. And this was back in the days when cell phones were flip phones. And he said he picked it up and it fell apart in his hands. And he wrote in his letter that that cell phone had made one last call, and that call had saved his life. Now, that really impacted me. And I took that letter, and the next time I was in Calgary, I went in on night shift, and I sat down with Dave. And I said, Dave, do you remember back in September when you did a locate? He said, yeah, I think I remember that, Fraser, yeah. And I said, here's the letter. And he looked over the letter, and he looked at me, and I said, I was just trying to think of something to ask him. I said, you know, did you go home that night and tell your wife what you did? And he looked at me and he said, Fraser, this is what we do. And you know, that just really impacted me, that that guy had a much better perspective on what he does for a living than, say, I did. So I submit to you what we really do in telecom. And this changed me after that. It changed the way I viewed my career. We basically provide the communications fabric for people at work, at home, and on the move. And without telecommunications, everything stops. Now think about it. If there's no telecommunications network, you can't take money out of the bank. You can't buy gas for your car at a gas pump with your credit card. You can't call for an Uber. You can't talk to your people. You can't call for help at 4 o'clock in the morning on 911. And so really, this really changed the way I view. In fact, shortly after that conversation with Dave, I spoke on this very topic at a Quest Forum event in Los Angeles, maybe 200 or 300 telecommunications people in the room. And I told this story very similar to what I just told you. And I stepped down off the stage, and this gentleman came up to me. He was probably pretty close to retirement, and he was obviously very emotionally shaken. And he said to me, our leaders haven't talked to us like that in a long time. Now, the reason I share that with you is it really impacted what he had done in his life work, and he saw it a different way. And that's why I'm here to tell you this story, so that you look at it in the businesses that you're in and really look at it from the bigger, more global perspective. So as leaders, this is your call to action. I encourage you to really look at what you really do and do it for your teams and your people and your organizations. Really get under that and understand the big picture of what you do.